DogWorks Radio is sponsored by Alaska Dog Works. Check out their website at alaskadogworks.com.
This episode of the podcast is brought to you by First Paw Coffee Company, specializing in private label premium blend coffee. If you're serious about coffee, you should check it out. First Paw Coffee's passion is high-quality, small-batch roasted coffee. They take the extra time to taste and get everything perfect before they release new blends. They aim to bring you a cup of happiness each time you pour yourself some coffee. Find out more at ak.dog/free and enter for a chance to win some First Paw Coffee prizes, a book from our collection, and tote bag. One winner will be selected at random each month. That's ak.dog/free.
From First Paw Media, sponsored by First Paw Coffee Company, this is the Dog Driver Show. Visit our website at dogworksradio.com. Now here are your hosts, Robert Forto and Parto.
Hello and welcome, everybody. This is Robert Forto, and you're listening to the Dog Driver Show, and I am joined by my co-host, KP. KP, how's it going?
Excellent today. As you see, we start to have a little bit of snow in the mountains, actually. It's kind of exciting. We had a phenomenal dry land event at the CDMA tracks last weekend. Lots of fun. And now it's time to focus more and more on sled training.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it as well. I know the Chugach Dog Mushers Association just had their first big race of the year, the Dryland Championships this past weekend. It looked like there was a really big turnout. But today we're going to talk to Willow, Alaska dog musher John Wood. He primarily works in stage racing, but he's also done Ronde and several other sprint races. And I think I've seen John a time or two on the trails parallel to us over in the Deception Swamp. So he is sort of my neighbor up here in this neck of the woods. John, how's it going?
Going good, Rob. And yes, we do train primarily over in Deception Creek. Good to hear from you.
Likewise. So we're going to be talking today primarily about stage racing. That is something we have not spoken about yet here on the Dog Driver Show. KP, kick us off.
Hey, John, thank you for giving us the opportunity to chat with you today. Today I wanted to talk to you about the style of the racing that stage racing presents for us. I know that you're a friend, you're my neighbor, and you've been training many same style trails that we are training. But tell us a little bit how you train and how you prepare for stage racing.
Where the difference lies, in my opinion, I did open class prior to that for many years, is in the training of the team itself. It takes a lot more of a discipline. The dogs have to listen to your commands. There are no closed trails, so you're capable of taking one of thousands of trails when you're out there during the race, and sometimes you do that. So you have to have total control over your team, not only directionally, but when you run into adverse conditions, whether there be a glaciation situation or deep, deep snow, which is quite frequent as well. So you're given a bunch of challenges that you'll never see in a sprint race, particularly these days.
John, I know that you've been training and racing open class Rendezvous ONAC and with Mary, of course, for many years. Are they the same dogs that you are taking from the, your 20-miler and 30-mile runs to a longer distance, or you have to adjust the type of the dogs and the breeding program?
We use the same exact dogs, and there were a few years that not only did we run a stage race or even two stage races, but then we came back to Alaska and put them into the Open North American. And I know the Streeters do much the same thing. They'll put dogs into the stage race and then go over and run Ronde and North American and then the La Paz. So it's a matter of what you condition the dogs to, number one, and how well trained they are, number two. But yes, they're the same dogs.
For our listeners who are not very familiar with stage racing in general, and we have thousands of people listening to these interviews throughout Europe, Scandinavia, Lower 48, and Alaska, explain to us the concept of stage racing.
Boy, that's a loaded question. It allows you to have a pool of dogs. When I was doing it, there were 16 dog pools, of which you can only run 12 maximum per day. You can run anywhere from 5 to 12. It's your call, but you can't go beyond that 12 limit. So you have to have a multitude of leaders, number one, because they can't run 7, 8 days in a row with those kind of distances and be able, or most dogs can't, I should say, be able to do that. So you're going to have more G-Hawk trained dogs that will listen to your commands. But it'll also give you the opportunity, and this is why I really love the format, to rest the dogs that need resting in between the different heats. So you can give a dog a time off or even 2 days off if you have a slight problem with one, and it'll come back later on during the course of that stage race, and you can be right there using it again on day 4. So it's a question, your strategy. Do you have fresh dogs up in front constantly by rotating, and most people do that, or do you somehow alternate them where you've got a super leader and you don't have that issue? It's really interesting because you can also tailor them to the conditions. Some dogs handle soft snow conditions a lot better than others, and you'll always run into a stage or two where there's what I call bottomless trail. It basically was just put in a day or maybe 2 days before the race itself, and you're just kind of wallowing through it. And a dog that's accustomed to a sprint type of hard trail will not be able to handle that.
Normal distances, or do they change each stage?
Well, it's changed since I last ran, but before you'd be running a 30-mile race one day, a stage one day, and the second day you'd be running a 60-mile, and it would alternate anywhere between 30 and 70 miles. So at one time or another, every dog in the team is going to have to run that longer distance, and every time you're going to have one running a shorter distance, sometimes during the course of that stage race.
Are there minimum amount of dogs you can put in the team?
Yes, there was. You could go with no less than 5.
Oh, 5. Gosh, that's a lot. Adjusting these dogs who are used to run.
Let me raise that point with you, Karush, if I could. Some mushers are very light, and it seems like the females seem to have that advantage. And they will go with 8 dogs or so every day, so that allows them to have a new team each day, because you have a pool of 18 to choose from. And that gives you a huge advantage over a bigger person who has to run more than 8 to be able to get around in a competitive time.
And the trail conditions, as you mentioned, they are not the standard trail conditions we are used to in Alaska. So bringing a dog, I'm assuming running our style of trails, 20 miles an hour or plus, to the speed of the stage, create a challenge?
Oh, it's more than a challenge. You'll run in from anything to a halfway decent sprint type of a surface, all the way to where we came after one storm, and I was following Rachel Sidoris in Prineville, Oregon, and it was a blizzard-type conditions. I said, I'll just keep her in sight and stay behind her. She knows these trails. And she caught on to what I was doing and said, nuh-uh, come on by. We actually went right by this yellow thing that was in the snow, and what it was a whatever those rigs they call to do the trails that they pull the groomers had actually buried it on up, and they evacuated them out the night before. So that's how much snow you can have overnight in some of those mountain ranges, and it's just tough on the dogs when you get something like that.
So the drifts of like 8-9 feet of drift on the side of the trail, is that right?
On the trail itself, piston bully. It actually covered the piston bully. The only thing showing was the little top roof.
Goodness, glad we are not getting that here. These stages you are talking about, are they all daily stages, or you have night races too?
They're run during daylight hours. There's some requirements that you quote camp unquote overnight on one or two of the stages, but it's not really camping like we know up here in Alaska. For instance, they're right next to a ski resort, and you are required to sleep out in the snow or the rain, whichever the case may be, with the dogs. But beyond that, it's not like you're bivouacking and cutting down your own firewood or anything like that. No, you have the dog trucks that are still transporting the dog food, and you go get it and whatnot.
Majority of our listeners who are not familiar with the stage race in general, they are not aware of the main race that a lot of people are targeting, which is the pedigree race in the Wyoming, in the mountains. Each stage is at a separate location, new location.
That is correct. It'll go from town A to town B, and then from town B the next day to town C or some other different situation altogether where you got to drive. During the course of the Wyoming race one year, my wife Mary and daughter Katie drove 1,200 miles during the 7 days of racing.
So the handlers basically, they follow the team which they are going from point A to point B. Is that correct?
They only follow in the sense that they are going to be at the next town. They can't follow the teams. We go through trails that have no roads anywhere near them, over mountains, etc.
So you don't start and you don't finish at the same location. You change the finish to a new location.
It varies, KP. For instance, in the Oregon stage race, yes, you did. You start off at Prineville and you'd come back in a big loop and end in Prineville. But in Wyoming, no, a lot of the times you'd start off in one town and end up in the next town. And so it just depends on how they've got it set up.
A lot of my friends, they always tell me that it's such a fun event it is, and such a new adventure and a new aspect of our sport. Personally, as you know, I've done limited and open and races all over the place, and this is something that is very interesting to listen to. Tell us some of the most interesting stories that you've encountered in some of those races.
Well, because of the rough terrain and some of the conditions, equipment failures are not unusual. I had a situation in one of the stage races where on the way up to the starting line on an icy parking lot, a lady with a baby stroller pulled right in front of the team. The only way I had of stopping was to really wrench back on the handlebars and drop it, at which time we broke the handlebars off. So I ended up running 54 miles up and down through the mountains with no handlebars, which was a challenge, particularly going downhill. Uphill it wasn't so bad, but downhill trying to guide it was a challenge and a half. You have situations that present themselves all the time. You've just got to be innovative and deal with the problems as they arise and not get the dogs alarmed. Just handle it calmly and go about your business.
For some of our friends who are not familiar with you, you are also a very intricate part of the Anchorage Club for years, and you actually helped putting a lot of those trails together, and you've raced for Rondi also several times. How do you compare Rendezvous to some of those stage races?
Stage races are a lot more fun than any sprint race I've been involved with. And, yes, I've run Rondi several times. I've run North American several times, and they're both great races. I'm not taking anything away from them. But the camaraderie and the connection with the dogs, I think, is second to none with the stage racing. That's both raced stage racing in Oregon, Wyoming, and then they had the one in Anana, which was a challenge and a half. But just the ability to work with different dogs and actually train them up a lot more than you do in the sprint racing. And I have nothing against sprint racing. I enjoy it. But it's basically, from my perspective, tunnel racing, in that they block off all side trails, etc. And the trail conditions now are just pavement-like as far as hardness and being extremely fast. So it's taken the toughness out of the dogs. You no longer are breeding for good feet or a good coat, etc. You're breeding for speed. And with the stage racing, the speed is important, don't misunderstand me, but the ability to hold up under some really tough pulling conditions is even more important.
So earlier you learned about First Paw Coffee Company, and now I'm going to tell you about its Tail Wagger Blend. First Paw Coffee Company's Tail Wagger Blend is their first offering, and its name and label were crowdsourced from their Facebook fans. How cool is that? The Tail Wagger Blend is a private label premium blend that was developed just for them. It is a medium roast from Colombian beans with tastes of Brazil nuts, grapefruit, and oak. Be sure to go to ak.dog/free and enter to win a bunch of cool prizes. That's ak.dog/free.
So the foot care and the animal care is, of course, more important, you believe, in a longer, your 40-mile or 50-mile distances. Is that correct?
That is correct, and the conditions you're racing under are a lot more challenging. However, having said that, you also have the ability, and that's the beauty of the stage format, you have the ability if the dog is a little gimpy one day, not taking that dog long, but yet when day 3 or day 4 comes along and that dog's fine, put it back into the team. You don't have that with a sprint. Once you drop it on the first day, it's gone.
Yeah, that is true. That is true. We encounter that. Diet-wise, when you did the stages, what type of diets do they have? Do they have a higher amount of fat? What do you feed them? Do they lose appetite because of the longer distance, or is it easier for them, in your opinion, because they're not running as full speed as they would do on a fast sprint trail?
The diet itself, what didn't change, other than it was a lot tougher down in the warmer climates to keep meat good, whereas up here in the north that's not an issue. So we fed them meat and dry kibble. Sometimes what we'd run into, which you don't encounter up here particularly, is because of the heat that you face down in the lower 48 and the 7 days in a row long distance, sometimes they'll lose their appetite, and you've got to be able to address that as well.
We talked about the dogs this year. What are you planning to do? I saw some of your yearlings. You have beautiful pups on the ground. Yeah,
as you know, KP, we're winding down. We won't be in the sport much longer. You know, I'm 73 years old, and it's just getting a little tough on the body. But Mary will run sprint. She may run through some short open class. I don't know. She hadn't made up her mind on that. But we'll primarily do 8 and 10 dog and some 6 dog. And then Katie will race once in a while. And if I have a dog that needs training, I'll get into a race, but it won't be to be competitive. It'll be strictly to train the dogs.
You mentioned that you've been in the sport for a long time. Tell us a little bit of background behind your dogs and some of the bloodlines that you have in your yard right now.
Yeah, right now the bloodlines are divided almost equally between primarily cook dogs and then second the breeding line from you and Kenny's lines, and that's about all we got left. At one time, we were very heavy into Charlie Champagne lines, but that was years ago, and that's since changed over to these houndier dogs. Totally different handling of the 2 different breeds. The Huskies are a lot easier to work with, from my perspective. From others, the hounds are. So it depends on your personality trait, I guess. You actually, I was fixing about asking the same question. You being in the sport with the Alaskan Huskies and the cross hounds and full hounds, you've seen it all probably. So you think it's definitely different style of dog. What about the maturity of the dogs? Do you think the Alaskans, they were easier to harness break and run and start easier and simpler at a younger age? Yes, particularly with females, but more importantly, once you got them trained to what it is you want them to do, they seem to hold up better than the hounds do, mentally, I would say. When the going gets tough, they were there. I'm not so certain that's true, at least what I've observed from the hounds. But people are being very, very successful with the hounds, so I guess it's how you approach it. You're a great example of someone that has taken the hounds and done phenomenal with them.
Yeah, Robert, you have a different style of dogs compared to some of the sprint dogs that we have. How do you compare your style of dogs with what the stage dogs in the field?
It's pretty interesting. I've never competed in a stage race, but I know that folks like Lance Mackey and others have gone down and ran in the pedigree stage stop in particular, running with more of a distance style dog, and they seem to be doing okay. Of course, they're not born and bred to do that type of race, but it appears that they work out pretty well.
The equipment that we are using in the stage races and the bigger teams, John, are they completely different than the one that we are using in the limited classes?
The sled itself, yes, is a big difference, and the the ability to maneuver the sled, it's a little bit longer than the sprint sled, and it's not nearly as responsive to the steering that the new sprint sleds are. If you'd asked me that question 15, 20 years ago on the old sprint sleds, I would say they're comparable, but it's no longer the case.
I know that I'm jumping from one subject to the other subject. What about training? Do you start training differently if you would be training, let's say, for an 8-dog or 10-dog class in your area in Willow, Alaska, than if you were preparing for a stage? And what distance will you want to hit when you are in, like, let's say, December or January?
Oh, yeah, it's night and day difference. When we were doing stage, we'd start in August and get them on up to 20-mile runs by the end of October. And then after that, we'd bounce them up to 30, 35, come back to 20, go up to 40, et cetera, until time to leave to go to the stages. With your limited class, no, in all honesty, the dogs are young and just got to get them conditioned, get some muscles on them. It doesn't take but a month to 6 weeks to get that done. And once you get them running 10 miles with the 8-dog class, you're not going to go beyond that, but maybe one race out of the year, and you can get them up for that. So the training is totally different, which leads you to the next area of people considering getting into it. If you're going to train for stage, you need to be committed to training, whether it's raining or snowing or doing anything else. You've got to get the miles on the dog. So you don't have the option of looking out the door and say, it's 25 below, I'm not going to run today, or, it's snowing, or whatever the reason might be. You just don't have that option. The dogs have to be run.
And it doesn't matter if the dogs are loping or trotting, as long as they're making a distance at this speed, desired speed, you're fine with that?
No, I'm fine if they're loping when I ask them to lope and they're trotting when I ask them to trot, but that decision's mine.
So you have actually command to slow the team down when you're going through passes and mountains and down hills and up hills?
Oh, when you're doing stage, absolutely. For instance, we ran into a stage over when the Nana stage race was still in existence, where there was a football-sized field of nothing but glaciated ice with 2 frozen junk cars protruding out of them. And if you didn't have the ability to just come down to a walk, you'd have been in just a world of hurts. And that's not uncommon to run into situations such as I just described. So you better have ability to bring the speed down.
And you train leaders and you train the whole team doing that?
Yeah, you're breaking up. But yes, we do train. In fact, if you've ever, not in recent years, if you ever used to watch me come up to the line, I'd come up to the line with 16, 18 dogs, and it would be just Katie on the leader and me on the sled. But I'd give them command as we're coming up to the starting line, ho, slow down, ho, and they would stop, okay? That was trained into them. I don't do that any longer because we're not running stage any longer, but that's commands that you have to really be able to instill. And once again, goes back to what I was initially describing, the difference in approach of the 2 races and the reason that I enjoyed stage so much more.
And traveling, of course, when you're doing stage races, especially you're going down to the lower 48, that's a big, big deal also for the dogs. Do they quit eating, catch bugs, or anything funky about such long distance?
Well, other than truck breakdowns, which you can almost count on happening, dogs handle it better than humans do. We spent days out like Burwash Landing one time, but the front wheel came off, and we spent a day and a half there at 57 below. And that's just not a fun time, but the dogs handle it fine. But you've got to get out every 2 or 3 hours and take care of them, and it's the humans that really take the beating on the traveling back and forth.
When you're traveling with them in long distances like that, what is your regimen? How do you water, drop, feed, do the breaks with the dogs?
You try when you're running down that distance to get as much driving time as you can during daylight hours, just because it's a lot easier on the driver. And I've done it alone. I've done it with Katie, so I do the primary driving. And what that entails is then you get it down to a feeding when you stop at night, and then you drop them sometime during the night to do the business, and then in the morning you'll go ahead and water them and feed them a little bit. And after that, about 2 hours after that, you'll go ahead and drop them. And then you try every 3 or 4 hours while they're going down the road to drop them. And you hope to be able to stop like at Terry Streeper's place or someplace and give them a run, somewhere between Alaska and the lower 48, so that they get to stretch and just kind of relax. Now, if it's real warm, we've gone down when it's real warm and you got a different set of circumstances altogether. In that case, you got to be careful not to overheat them, but they enjoy it more because they jump out of the box and all of a sudden there's this green stuff called grass, so they're digging and just having a great old time, whereas up here they've been having ice. So it depends on what you're doing. One particular cold trip when Magali and I were traveling, we weren't even together. We just happened to hit the same rest stops along the way because there's only a certain amount of places you can stop that are plowed. And she was just discussing something in French which she wasn't happy with, but it was like 45 below, and she was having a heck of a time getting water down to the ground in an unfrozen state for the dogs to be able to drink. And the way we solved it, we stopped at Terry's and picked up some chicken, and we'll feed them frozen chicken that had water in it. But until you get through that really bad cold, it was a dickens of a time keeping them hydrated.
You also mentioned stretching the dogs. What do you mean by stretching the dogs? Explain to us. I know what it is, but a lot of listeners, they don't.
Well, what we'll do is we'll take them, on a course that's easy duty. You're not trying to race them or anything, and just let them run at reasonable pace and run 5, 10, 15 miles and come on back. Just make sure you know what you're doing, because I stopped at I can't think of the name, right outside of Terry's place, Muskwa River or something like that, where I had raced years earlier in the Canadian Open, and I got out there with the dogs on one of these trips, and lo and behold, all of a sudden I got running water on my right, and then a little bit later the water running on my left. And at this point in time, you say, "Oh man, I'm in deep doo-dah," and got back and I called up Terry because his handler had said everything was fine. He said, "Oh no, you shouldn't have gone on that trail," and I said, "No kidding," But most of the times it's not that exciting. You'll be able to stop in someplace like Saunderson's, or you get to know a lot of people up and down the road, and just let the dogs run out a little bit. Or if you get into an open prairie or farmland, you can just let the dogs loose and let them run around the truck and just be dogs.
Very good. Robert, I believe you have the question that we asked our guests when we are toward the end of our interviews.
Yes, but I also have a couple of quick follow-up questions with John, if you don't mind. John, in our conversation in the earlier in the show, you had talked about your handler crew that had to drive about 1,700 miles on one of the race, and I think truly in stage racing, the unsung heroes are the handlers that are following along. How do they deal with this when you sign up for one of these races? Are they as gung-ho as you as the musher, or are they sort of dreading the plod through the trail, so to speak?
Well, I'm not a good one to ask because my handlers were my wife and my daughter, okay? So it's not a typical relationship in that regard. But they both very much enjoyed it. And it's beyond just the 1,200-mile drive. They are also feeding the dogs, taking care of the feet and doing everything else, and the diplomatic portion of it. And by that I mean you're staying with a family every night, and the musher needs sleep, so it's up to the handlers to answer all the questions that the host people have, and they all have a litany of questions and have their friends over. It's a big deal down there. I was at one banquet drive, and this guy, and they introduced me and whatnot, and the guy yells out from the audience, "I know you ran over my wife last year." And he was right. I came around a blind corner, and she was standing in the trail. I can't see the front end of my team. Sure enough, we ran right over her. And he was just so happy as could be about it next year. It's a community affair, and that's what's so fun about it,
Right. A good comparison, I think, for our non-mushing listeners would be something like the Tour de France for stage racing, where you're going from place to place. Is it true, and again, I don't know a heck of a lot about stage mushing, but is it true that there is a heck of a lot of money and a heck of a lot of awards that can be won along the trail, not just kind of that overall winner, but there's prizes along the way? Is that how it works?
They do have daily prizes, but the big ones are the ones for the composite results. But yeah, you fit in the top 10 or 15 in one of the races I was in, and you got like a ton of dog food, okay? And it was delivered to my place out here in Willow. But there are a lot of other good things that you can do. Some stages are sponsored by breweries, for instance, so you end up having a few beers under your belt. And it's just a lot of new, interesting people you meet that are become friends over the years. And they'll come up here to visit Alaska, and they'll stay with us. And just a great format. I wish everyone would have a chance and opportunity to do so. And I encourage KP and others that are really good mushers to get out there and do it. I think it would open up a new horizon.
Excellent. All right, John, we have one final question. We ask all of our guests to the same question, and hopefully you will have some new insight for us. The question is, if somebody were to come up to you and ask you for some advice, what is one piece of advice you would give them, whether they're starting out in, dryland racing, or they're thinking about doing Ronde or stage stop or whatever? What would be that one piece of advice you would give a brand new musher?
Real simple. Mentor with an established kennel that's operating in that sphere of operations. In other words, if you want to run stage, go to a stage team and say, hey, I'd like to learn the sport, and can I participate with you? And I'll bet you they'd get an absolute yes and a welcome. KP, anything else before we close here?
No, John, wanted to thank you one more time to give us this interview and the time to chat with you. I really, really enjoyed knowing more about stage racing in general, and looking forward to watch some of the competition in the field in the upcoming months.
Good talking with you folks.
Thank you, John. We'll talk again soon. KP, thanks again for a great show, and until next time, goodbye.
This episode of the podcast is sponsored by First Paw Coffee Company. Learn more at firstpaw.coffee.
From First Paw Media, this is the Dog Driver Show. We hope you enjoyed this podcast, and we invite you to subscribe in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts. You'll find a link on the episode notes. You can tap or swipe on the episode cover art, and you can see some offers from our sponsors. You can support our show by supporting them. If you like what you have heard, we would love it if you could give us a 5-star rating and tell your friends how to subscribe too. Your hosts are Robert Forto and Kurosh Parto. Our producer is Robert Forto and created for First Paw Media.